For over 39 months, Russia has waged war on Ukraine, and today we'll examine the military situation there. I'm Julian Rupke, this is BILD Situation Room. These were the worst attacks Russia has launched on Ukraine in the last 48 hours. Just yesterday, nearly 500 kamikaze drones, cruise missiles, and tonight ballistic missiles on Kyiv again, along with hundreds of drones once more. But Ukraine is responding to this terror. Not with terror of their own, not targeting Russian civilians, but with precise and strategic strikes against Russia's defense industry. We're now looking at new videos about it. The first one is from Cheboksary, a city located about 400 kilometers east of Moscow, and we can already see the approach of a Ukrainian drone. Here we observe a Luty-2 drone striking the electrotechnical factory in Cheboksary. We can see it quite clearly. This is relatively easy to recognize, a Luty drone or Zorn drone, which has been co-financed by Germany for several weeks now. We know that Friedrich Merz has provided 400 million euros for the co-financing of precisely these drones. And we can also see how incredibly precise these drones have become in their strikes. Because we see here, as I said, the electrical engineering factory, and we can see the second strike just a few meters away from the first. This means that here we have this absolute precision of the Ukrainian Air Force or the Ukrainian drone forces, often operated by the GUR, the Military Intelligence and the Domestic Intelligence Service, the SBU. Another perspective here, clearly visible as well, is that smoke is already coming out, and then the second hit strikes. And the whole situation has become really challenging for the Russians because on one hand, they have to take critical hits every day. We are now seeing more approaches filmed by passers-by because these drones are now arriving in daylight, specifically in the morning, after flying for half the night, only going about 200 kilometers per hour. And yet, Russian air defense is failing to shoot down these drones here, at least not all of them. So critical targets are being hit every day. Let's take a look at another fire in the neighboring city in Kazan. Here, the Ukrainers said yesterday that a gunpowder factory was hit. The Russians claim that's not true at all. Firstly, it's a paint factory and it's just an accident. However, Zaboksary and Kazan, neighboring cities directly affected, had fires break out around the same time. Therefore, it's extremely questionable whether this is actually the case, whether this massive smoke and burning factory here fell victim to an accident, coinciding exactly with the Ukrainian drone strike, or whether the Ukrainians have indeed attacked the two neighboring cities of Kazan and Zaboksary, each with long-range drones. Both cities are located approximately 1,000 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. We'll examine this on the map to further illustrate the significant challenges that Russian air defense is now clearly dealing with. Because now we're seeing here on one hand the range, seeing all of this far east of Moscow. That means the drones, and this must be emphasized again and again, are intentionally not targeting Moscow for political reasons, but rather flying past Moscow and then hitting the critical infrastructure, the military infrastructure of the country. And the important thing we're seeing here, we have here the Ukrainian regions of Kharkiv, Sumy, and Chernihiv. On the Russian side, Bryansk, Kursk, and Belgorod stand out as key strategic areas in the region's broader military context. And all Ukrainian drones pass through there, they fly through there. That means the Russians know precisely where to deploy their air defense systems. They know precisely which, yes, this roughly 300 to 400 kilometer long border they must secure to block the Ukrainians, and yet the audience is spreading various rumors about it, claiming that it happens almost every single night without fail. That means either the Russians don't have enough missiles left, or they just can't manage to intercept these drones anymore, because after tens of thousands of drones, I think you can say that already, after tens of thousands of Ukrainian long-range drones, they're just low on missiles. Or, as we're seeing, the Russians have their Tor, Pantsir, and Buk systems, all of their air defense capabilities in place. What was stationed there has simply been lost over time because the Ukrainians, with their roughly 50 to 100 kilometer range, threaten these very systems in these three regions, which I've attempted to outline here, could be targeted. In any case, we're now seeing the results every day, every morning. Ukraine is focusing its attacks on military, not civilian, targets of Russia, thereby exacting retaliation on one hand, while simultaneously undermining Russia's strategic capabilities through their long-range drone strikes. From Russia to Ukraine, we return to the east, where the situation continues to be extremely dire for the Ukrainian forces. That means these daily attacks we witness from both sides currently do not lead to or have any visible impact on the overall front lines at this moment. There, the Russian army continues to advance. We have new footage from Soria showing us that another small town has been captured by Russia. Once again, it's interesting how the Russians are posing on the rubble of this destroyed city. This is officially published by RIA Novosti, Russia's state news agency. The Russians here are prominently showcasing both the modern tricolor and the historic Tsarist Empire flag in this event, apparently somewhat oblivious to history. Nevertheless, in Russia, they celebrate the Tsar, Stalin, and Putin relatively independently of each other. Even in the times when their paths crossed, they hardly had the friendliest of relationships. Nonetheless, as we can clearly observe now, it's evident that Soria has firmly come under the control of the Russian army. And before we take a glance at the map, we observe what the Russians are doing to strike further north in Jablonivka. And here we see new Russian attacks, and notice it's not just fiber optic drones. These are completely normal radio-controlled drones which are being used to attack Ukraine here. And here we also see a bit of a death road, you could say. This is a supply route for Jablonivka. We can already see numerous wrecks scattered here. And now another vehicle is being targeted, specifically an XA-180 Sisu, which was delivered from Finland. The first drone has already hit it, and we can see a recovery vehicle lying nearby. So it was also attacked and immobilized. We can also see this equipment here beside it. It was also intended to construct new fortifications, developing defensive structures to effectively secure and protect the area. But it was only delivered and no longer installed. That means the Russians, their attacks are so massive here in the region. The Ukrainians face immense struggles and continue to retreat further back, partially, and we'll see this on the map in a moment, up to 5 kilometers a day. Here's additional footage. We see the Russian clearly. It's crucial to set the Sisu on fire at the end, ensuring it can't be moved. Here we see it at the end. But the whole thing is really a difficult situation for the Ukrainian army, as they simply can't keep up with the supply and logistics here anymore. We're examining the situation on the map, focusing on Jablonivka, where we just saw these images, but also in Soria nearby. The Russians are advancing strongly in both areas. And once again, it's this new city, Konstantinivka, that has become the central focus and primary target of the advancing Russian army. We caught a glimpse of that during our camera's approach just now. Here we've just seen the footage from Soria, which by now is firmly under Russian control. We see that in Jablonivka, and right around here we've just observed the attacks on this Sisu, which also, there the Russians have already captured about a third. And we have brand new footage from yesterday, albeit only about 2 seconds long, showing us that the Russian army managed to advance with motorcycles into Alexandru Kalinovo, and for the first time was present in the city in the south with motorcycles, or, well, made their appearance. It's unclear if they held ground. Ukrainians say the motorcycles were repelled during the Russian presence. However, we don't have any footage that clearly confirms it. Nonetheless, we see just the distance between Soria and Alexander Kalinovo, as I just mentioned, is about 5 kilometers. Just the day before yesterday, the Russians openly raised their own flag in Soria. Yesterday, the brief footage, only 2 seconds long, isn't shown here, of Russian soldiers arriving in Alexander Kalinovo on motorcycles. The Ukrainians are in grave danger, struggling to stabilize their front line under immense pressure. Just 2 months ago, the front line extended all the way down here, which clearly indicates the situation in this entire region. Area, think on a broader scale, this entire region here swiftly fell under Russian control in just 2 to 3 months. A bit further north near Chasiv Yar, the Russian army is advancing further. Here as well, we have new footage from the Russian side, intended to demonstrate that Stupochki, a small suburb of Chasiv Yar, situated to the southwest of the town, has been successfully captured. Yet, the Ukrainians are firmly stating it's untrue. Only a portion of the village is under Russian control, this building and roughly 10 surrounding structures. Part of the village is still controlled by the Ukrainians, and that could very well be the case because, as we can see in this footage, the Russians essentially cannot prove they're in the village center, but they've managed to establish a foothold in the northern part. Nevertheless, once again, the Russians are showing us, you see, there's a big road beside it, and these traffic signs are there, meaning we control, well, at least from the air. The Russians are demonstrating control over this area, at least from the air, if not on the ground. It's an extremely tough situation for the Ukrainian army, as Chasiv Yar acts as a key defensive point for Konstantinivka, which is now 90% under Russian control. And if the Russians manage to bypass Chasiv Yar here, then the remaining 10% of the city is also at serious risk of falling into enemy hands that are still under Ukrainian control, could be encircled. That's also something we want to take a look at on the map. As I said, the developments here are so recent that we need to map them out ourselves. Nevertheless, here is Konstantinovka, here is Chasiv Yar, and what we just observed was Stupochki. It appears the Russians have succeeded in pushing to the northern outskirts of Stupochki, which is tough for the Ukrainians as they're still holding their ground here in Chasiv Yar. We remember, and Chasiv Yar, a fairly large city that is also fully part of everything happening now. All of that was part of Chasiv Yar, and this small section here is still under Ukrainian control at present. In other words, it's also becoming dangerous for the Ukrainers there, as they could lose Chasiv Yar on one hand, and then the Russians could move past it and also attack Konstantinovka from the east. A third advance of the Russian army we still need to look at, namely in the area of the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. For the first time, it appears the Russians have successfully established a foothold here. We have footage that clearly demonstrates an attack on an area, and we can confidently confirm that this is indeed the regional border. That means we have an area that is being pinpointed, where we'll first see Ukrainian units, then the attack on them, and then what happens afterward. Russians are advancing here. First, multiple rocket launchers bombard the area, as is often the case, and then the Ukrainian positions are targeted, followed by the advancing Russian forces moving in. Baba Yaga drones here hunted and brought down from the sky, which were attempting to defend everything. We observed direct assaults targeting Ukrainian military personnel, soldiers, and their vehicles, particularly in this specific area of the region. This clearly shows we're positioned directly at the oblast border. But it's very symbolically important for Ukraine because for a long time they've been saying, yes, the fighting is happening in Donetsk. Here, the whole thing is again quite favorably framed by the Russians, propagandistically speaking. So you can see directly, here is what they call the People's Republic of Donetsk is of course nonsense. It's actually the Ukrainian Oblast of Donetsk, and on the other side is the Ukrainian Oblast of Dnipropetrovsk. And both areas, well, now we have this situation here where the Ukrainians, after this intense and heavy bombardment, are forced to pull back, and the Russians subsequently move in to occupy these same positions, which were previously held by the Ukrainians. As I said, the Ukrainian army has long denied it, kept saying, no, there's absolutely no issue in Dnipropetrovsk. We're fighting in Donetsk, defending it at all costs. Those who claim Dnipropetrovsk is in danger are simply pushing Russian propaganda and fear. However, the Russian army has been moving toward it for months, getting closer and closer. And we'll take a look at the map shortly to see where they have now managed to gain a foothold for the first time in Dnipropetrovsk. We don't know if the Ukrainers were able to successfully push them back after these recordings were made. We don't know if these Russian soldiers we're seeing here celebrating were pushed out. However, when we look at the dynamics, the overall situation, and here we can see again that what's further to the right, that is precisely the border. There you can see that trench again, which essentially runs through there. When we look at the dynamics of the past few months, we have to assume that the Russians have now established a foothold here and are advancing further toward Dnipro. That's what I just said. So that's the trench, essentially right along the regional border. We also want to take a closer look at this on the map to fully understand why it's so critically important for the Ukrainian army. We have the Donetsk region, which is currently around 70% under the control of the Russian military forces. But Dnipropetrovsk, with the major city of Dnipro, the metropolis Dnipro in the center, that hasn't been fought over on the ground at all so far. And here we have the situation we just observed. The advancement or crossing of the oblast border took place north of Koryshev, which is located just a few kilometers southwest of Pokrovsk in that specific region, which we just observed, the area. Here the map isn't fully updated yet, but this is roughly the direction in which the Russian forces have been steadily advancing. And at this specific point here, let's mark the entire cross at this precise spot. They have just crossed the oblast border. The whole thing is not only symbolically a major problem for Ukraine, but of course militarily as well. Here's Novopavlivka, the location where, as per our information, the logistics of the Ukrainian army indeed passed through, since it was essentially the last village in Dnipropetrovsk before reaching Donetsk. This made it a critical point for supply routes and strategic operations. And situated just above, we have Mashova, a city of considerable importance that I personally had the opportunity to visit in April, and thousands of civilians live there. This means it's a city where there has been no destruction whatsoever and where the people have not yet fled, where both civilians and Ukrainian soldiers are stationed, and from that specific location, they have been actively coordinating and managing the defense efforts to protect the city of Donetsk. And we can observe that the Russian army has steadily pushed forward. From the beginning of the year in Saradov, where the breakthrough occurred, in Okrotin as we recall, and then steadily pushed forward even further. And when you look at the whole thing, what has happened here in about 6 months? Zarania, then you can already assume that if it continues with this momentum and if it continues at this speed, that then Moshawa, with its thousands of civilians, is also in serious danger here in the Dnipropetrovsk area. Still, Ukraine's military continues to fiercely resist the Russian forces on the ground. We want to look at 2 videos that prove this. First, a new Switchblade video, and these Switchblades, as I mentioned, had a very bad reputation for a long time because the Switchblade 300 was very small, very weak, sometimes exploded, and the soldiers just kept going. And the Switchblade 600, essentially the biggest sibling of this kamikaze drone from the US, took forever to arrive. It was announced back in 2022, but it was still in the development phase, which meant it couldn't be used for quite a few years to come, unfortunately. Here, For the very first time, if I'm recalling correctly, it's genuinely the first ever coordinated Switchblade 600 attack specifically aimed at a column of the Russian army. We see the column here. I hope it's somewhat recognizable, though it's a bit hard to see. There are 4 vehicles in total, 2 BMP-2s, an MTLB, and a C-72 tank, all clearly visible in this formation. All these vehicles are moving in this direction, and we can see them one after another from this angle. This is essentially the view from the attacking drone. The vehicles move forward as the Switchblade 600 drones strike them one after another in sequence. Here we have the first impact on one of the vehicles. We see it relatively well here. There's the first one, there's the second one that was hit, here's the third one, and the tank arrives a bit later. First hit, then second and third. Tank arrives later, taking out vehicles one by one. The first one was hit here, is now going up in flames. And here we have the next approach. So here's the first one, keeps moving forward. The first one already hit, and the second one remains intact. And now we see the Ukrainians using their Switchblade 600s, going after the vehicles one by one, and ultimately taking out this entire convoy or column that was advancing here. Here's another BMP-2 that's just been hit, and now we see the one that's burning with the other one behind it. Now, as backup, a T-72 tank is arriving. Here it is, the third one in line, positioning itself directly behind them, and it's also being attacked by this drone. That means, by now, the Ukrainians seem to be quite successful. We can see the impact here, so this is definitely immobilized, if not even worse damage. The Ukrainians now appear to be capable, indeed with multiple of these drones, meaning with an entire squadron of Switchblade 600 drones, to effectively target and neutralize Russian convoys and effectively target them. And that's a significant advantage because these are highly advanced American drones, some even equipped with AI control, making them extremely precise and efficient, at least with assistance in the final approach to the target. Finally, we want to take a look at new footage from the Ukrainian Air Force. Here's footage from the south of the country, from Zaporizhzhia, and we can see yet again a deep look into the occupied territories of the region. What exactly are they doing? Right now, they're transporting ammo into this area, and then precisely these houses, these buildings, can be attacked. Here we saw it, the ones that were just supplied, where the Russians essentially stored weapons to later use them, as we can see here, in a relatively undamaged area, about 20-30 kilometers behind the front, in order to eventually launch attacks on the front line from that position. And we now see, however, that the French ASM-250 bombs are striking again, always in double packages. The first one struck the house, and the second one is now about to hit the ammunition that was just stored there. Here we see it. The ammunition explodes in the air, showing the Ukrainians can use their MiG-29s with French 500-pound bombs to precisely destroy enemy supplies, and weighing 250 kilograms to hit their target. That just now targeted an ammunition depot. We'll soon see a second video where a drone station is attacked, specifically a glass facade drone station. Here we can see it again, indeed, extreme devastation. So when you take a direct hit with such immense force, these French bombs, there's not much left afterwards. Here we now see the second scene, also in Zaporizhzhia. Up above, we can distinctly observe a drone operator from the Russian army. Meanwhile, down below, a fiber optic drone is being carefully and meticulously prepared for its launch, with the clear objective of being flown directly towards the front lines. And here we see once again how the Ukrainians are monitoring, reconnoitering, and observing where exactly the soldiers are stationed, where their ammunition is stored. Now, the highly targeted strike on this drone site, just 5 kilometers south of the front, makes complete sense considering their heavy reliance on drones for surveillance and targeting missions. With fiberglass drones, you can typically fly about 10 to 20 kilometers normally. There are exceptions where you can fly over 30 kilometers, but normally it's 10 to 20 kilometers worldwide. In the southern region, the Russians are particularly active, focusing heavily on stockpiling ammunition and deploying drones. But the Ukrainian Air Force, as we can see, has the capability, after hundreds of Ukrainian attacks on Russian air defense systems, even in occupied Ukraine, has the capability to continue operating here and indeed to defend the country.